In a very different world that seems completely damaged, a gigantic zombie army walks down the ground, destroying everything with its one unwavering punch. The scene then shifts to our MC, also known as the hero of the Demon of Taros, a member of the Human Alliance. Han Ji-hyuk smirks at the defeated scene in front of him, declaring that all his efforts were worth it. The man standing next to Ji-hyuk nervously looks at him and says why every time he goes into battle, Ji-hyuk insists Taros come with him. Ji-hyuk replies since he was the one who summoned him, it's fair for him to force him to stay by his side and watch Ji-hyuk effortlessly fight the monsters. Taros shrugs at his response and stutters at his own words as he tells Ji-hyuk that he has already seen how he fights with monsters, as if he was already a member of these forces in his past life. Hearing the old man's words, Ji-hyuk becomes provoked and yells at him, saying he is responsible for this mess as he dragged him out of his house while he was napping. He was thrown to fight some war that Ji-hyuk was unable to make any sense out and forced him to fight for 30 years. The old man sweats nervously as he realizes that Ji-hyuk was not wrong about this. Ji-hyuk continues, he didn't even have time to understand this so-called great cause of the Allied forces. Ji-hyuk pauses and looks in front of the scene and says that those enemies and everyone are no different from the Allied forces. The only reason he agreed to put up with this war was to make his way back to Earth. Ji-hyuk narrowed his eyes, and with his voice low now he told Taros to stop nagging and behave. Just as they were about to continue, a loud voice echoed and we saw the gigantic monster roar with rage at the Demon King, who lay on the ground with his blood dripping down his body. Upon seeing this, Ji-hyuk gets surprised and wonders how it was possible for the Demon King to die. His thoughts are left unanswered as Taros tells him that he has finally defeated the Demon King. A sigh escaped from Ji-hyuk and he said, so this is finally the end of the war. Ji-hyuk feels agitated as he tells Taros how he had prepared 4 more weapons just for the showdown with the Demon King. Only if he had known it would end like this he would have unleashed everything all at once. The old man looks at him with a surprised look on his face. He covers his mouth with his hand, hiding his shock as he wonders how he had 4 ultimate weapons prepared. Ji-hyuk turns, facing Taros as he tells him it is time to show the promise he made to Ji-hyuk. The scene shifts and we see Ji-hyuk embracing his reward as he keeps laughing to himself about his victory. Ji-hyuk remarks as pieces of gold slip from his hand, that once he gets back to his world he will live the rest of his life in peace with the help of the reward he earned. Taros informs Ji-hyuk that preparations have been made and if he is going to leave right away or stay with him for longer. Ji-hyuk faces Taros as he says that there's no point in delaying, besides even if he stayed Taros wouldn't be happy about it. Taros tries to respond saying that this is not what he meant, but Ji-hyuk interrupts him and tells him to stop the small talk and just send him back already. Taros hesitantly replies with a yes. Afterwards he shows him a stone, explaining that this stone has the power to alter the laws of causality and is the reason Ji-hyuk has remained in this world for 30 years. It is also the reason he has not aged or shown signs of time's passage. Ji-hyuk asks if breaking the stone will restore the laws of causality and send him back to the same moment he was taken from his world. Taros confirms, pointing a finger out that the stone has reached its limit and that even a minor impact would be enough to destroy it. He warns Ji-hyuk to resist the natural laws when they are restored. Ji-hyuk quickly takes the stone, ignoring the final warning before breaking it. He tells the old man that he never enjoyed knowing them and hopes to never see them again, then he breaks the stone. Ji-hyuk opens his eyes and finds himself back in his world. He quickly realizes he has returned to Earth. He declares that now he can do whatever he wants. The first thing he does is grab a bag of chips to snack on while wondering what he should buy. He continues and says that money or time are the least of his worries now, considering he has plenty of both. He opens his magic portal to check the items he had saved, but his expression changes abruptly. A sudden realization hits him. He finds his portal empty. Furthermore, he scans every corner by digging his head inside the portal. Anxiety consumes his body like he is losing his mind over the disappearance of everything he once had. He begins to recall the events he experienced when he first landed in the other world known as Saren. He remembers how confused he was when he got there. He recalls feeling completely lost as Taros stood beside him, explaining that he was now in the world of iron. Despite the explanation, Ji-hyuk struggles to learn what is happening and asks about the place. He found himself desperately wondering about how he had endured everything, especially during his early days of learning or when the books he studied made no sense to him. One time while in the library, Taros misheard what Ji-hyuk said and asked him to repeat it. Ji-hyuk angrily threw a book at Taros and complained that he couldn't understand why he was being forced to read such stuff. He remembers the battles he fought with his zombie army and the struggles he faced during the war. Back to the present, Ji-hyuk says that he had been waiting for the day he could return only to be betrayed by Taros. He goes insane as he yells that he can't retire without his retirement fund. Something unusual happens as Ji-hyuk notices a lightning strike through his path. He came to know that it was none other than the Manhwa wave. But how it was possible to strike on Earth? Jae-hyuk rushes out of his house to look at what is happening. He sees numerous Manhwa waves striking in the sky. He gets closer and is shocked by what he sees: dragons flying through the sky, and he wonders why such creatures are appearing on Earth. He suspects Taros is behind this, thinking that maybe he will send him somewhere else instead of Earth. He changes his route, back to his home. With one thought in his mind: to not let any trouble happen to him. But before he can rush to his house, Jae-hyuk notices a young boy who has fallen onto the ground while trying to escape. A dragon is chasing the boy and is about to attack him. The boy looked back and saw the dragon is rushing towards him. The boy, upon seeing the dragon, paralyzed with fear and can't do anything but cry. Jae-hyuk mutters that he is trying to stay out of this mess. He decides these monsters must pay for interfering with his ideas. Before he can use his abilities, he hears a voice from behind telling him to leave the area immediately. He turns to see the person who just spoke watching him slice the dragon that was about to eat the boy. Jae-hyuk looks at the scene with surprise as he notices that some people are wielding swords, others are using bows and arrows, and a few are equipped with shields. Jae-hyuk, shocked, wonders why people with such power were on Earth. The people resemble a lot from the Saren world. One of the soldiers notices Jae-hyuk and uses magic to warn him of a nearby danger, asking him to stay out of it. However, Jae-hyuk remains, still showing no signs of awareness, as a magical arrow narrowly misses his head. A massive explosion occurs behind him. Jae-hyuk continues to laugh. Rage fills his body as he yells internally, "Taros, where the hell did you send me?" The chapter opens with Jae-hyuk sitting at his desk, facing his computer. He stares at the recent news stating that after an entire day of thorough research, he has confirmed that this is the Earth, which now seems to be involved by monsters and individuals with unique abilities known as awakened. He recalls that leaving Saren, Taros had mentioned something about causality, but he decided that it was irrelevant now. What troubles him the most is that his plan has failed. Defeated, he remarks if he registers as an awakened and starts hunting in the gates, he could make money quickly. But because of his extreme laziness, he declares he doesn't want to step out of his zone and fight again. An idea crosses his mind. He says that he can use magic and leave everything to the skeletons if he needs to, but a problem stands in his way: how people would reach the undead. Jae-hyuk visits the Hunter Association to try his idea. People seem bewildered by what they see, as it is their first time encountering something unreal. They proceed with everything without any issues. Someone asks him if he can control the skeletons, and Jae-hyuk feels relieved, thinking to himself that the best part is that they have classified the skeletons as summoned monsters, meaning he won't need to explain further. The people in the association begin asking Jae-hyuk numerous questions, such as the maximum number of skeletons he can summon, whether he can unsummon them, and his combat abilities and skills. Feeling overstimulated by the sudden bullets of questions, Jae-hyuk asks them to calm down so he can answer everyone. He starts by telling them that he is still unsure of the maximum number of skeletons he can summon, as he can later store them in his magic portal. They continue by asking if Jae-hyuk can store other items in his portal, to which he replies that he can only store skeletons. Upon hearing his reply, they seem suspicious of his words and test it by throwing items into the portal. Unfortunately, none of them enters, and Jae-hyuk tells them he wasn't lying. They apologize, explaining that they acted that way because many people try to deceive them. Jae-hyuk tells them it's fine. They continue, announcing that it's time to test the combat skills of the skeleton. He picks up a bat and tells the skeleton that he won't go easy on it. A strong aura emerges from the skeleton before it attacks the man, easily destroying the skeleton with a single strike. He then declares with a confused look that the skeleton is weaker than he expected. The man looks at Jae-hyuk and tells him that they think that this level of testing is sufficient, and they will now have a quick discussion in the meeting room. The moment they leave the room, leaving Jae-hyuk alone, he activates his hearing abilities and hears them declaring that their capabilities are very weak and their combat abilities are far from impressive. After concluding, the association clarified he was an F rank. Later he receives the card, puts in his pocket, and decides that no matter what his rank may be, all he cares was the money. The scene shifts to Jae-hyuk, explaining that most necromancers use their mana to inject willpower into undead monsters, allowing them to move, but human mana has its limits. This method restricts the number of summons he can maintain. So Jae-hyuk came up with another method. One of his skeletons is surrounded by a golem, which seems nervous. The golem then spits a green liquid from its mouth, striking the skeleton. The liquid melts the skeleton's head, leaving Jae-hyuk surprised. He then summons several magic circles bearing unique patterns. He continues, explaining that if the green needle is emitted again, the skeleton should counter the attack 6 times, if it fails, then 7 times, and if even that doesn't work, block 11 times. If blocking 11 times is impossible, then go straight to 17 attacks. This is what he calls his macro system. Simply put, he pre-programs algorithms into the undead. He says that they can respond automatically in specific situations, following preset commands. This way, he doesn't have to control them manually, and he can summon as many units as he wants. Ji-hyuk nervously wonders to himself that he can't believe he is back to doing this. What resembles his method is a computer program, which keeps showing bugs caused by conflicting commands, so it wasn't perfect. As he orders his skeleton to buy a carton of milk, and if there are eggs, get 6. Instead, the skeleton ended up buying 6 cartons of milk because there were eggs. Ji-hyuk grits his teeth with frustration as he says that in the Saran continent, he had perfected his macros over 30 years. If he had those, he wouldn't have to deal with this mess and would have his retirement funds by now. He looks over the scene as the skeleton drags the golem and mutters, "What's the point of complaining? At least he can create a basic system for convenience later." He looks over his phone and says he has already been hunting for 4 hours, so it's time for him to head back. As Ji-hyuk walks with his skeleton army carrying the golem, soldiers stare at him with keen interest. 2 of the soldiers ask each other if he is that guy, to which the other guy says yes. They continue by saying that he has quite the crowd following him, and he did get classified as F rank, but he looks weak. Ji-hyuk stops midwalk as a guy with a buff physique, who is extremely pleased, tells him that he caught a lot today, with surprise. Ji-hyuk says to him that he didn't even touch them, so it means there's no need to check, he should start calculating quickly. He begins calculating, but Ji-hyuk insists there's no need for precise calculation since he didn't personally hunt the monsters and is fine with an approximate amount. The man ignores his words and calculates the reward before transferring it to his account. After a few minutes, he tells Ji-hyuk that the total comes to 20 million KRW and transfers it to his account. Upon seeing the transaction message, Ji-hyuk wonders that retirement still feels like a distant dream. As the man tells Ji-hyuk to come again, he turns his face, waving him goodbye. He mutters to himself that this is better than getting a high rank and drawing too much attention. Just survive the beginning, if he fine-tunes his macros, he will be fine. Ji-hyuk snaps out of his thoughts as he hears 2 men from a distance talking about him. He looks at them, trying to make sense of their conversation. He hears one of the guys saying that Ji-hyuk has so many summons he doesn't need a porter. The other guy agrees with the first guy as he continues that, honestly, 30,000 KRW per hour for a porter is way too expensive. Even with hazard pay, how many people actually die in these low-level gates? The second guy smirks at the first guy and tells him that if he is so interested in knowing, why doesn't he ask Ji-hyuk? He responds with a no and continues that summoners don't usually team up. They say their styles don't sync well. Ji-hyuk joins them. They turn their faces, facing him. One of the guys apologizes to Ji-hyuk, explaining that they were just chatting and expressing regret over his friend's inappropriate comments. Ji-hyuk smiles at them, waving his hand. He says that's not the issue here. In fact, he asks them if they were looking for a porter. Both of the guys look at each other with a confused look. They tell Ji-hyuk that they were actually thinking of hiring one. Upon hearing them, Ji-hyuk claps his hands with excitement and asks them if they would like to try a brand new porter as part of his grand opening event. The 2 immediately agree to Ji-hyuk's offer. Ji-hyuk takes them to his event, where he explains the business idea he came up with. They join him, and each of them uses their skills in hunting. After some time, they gather several monsters. They ask Ji-hyuk about his idea. He tells them about a skeleton in the form of a horse equipped with storage space that can be used for various items. He explains that the horse skeleton still requires refinement, but it's eco-friendly, doesn't need fuel, and never gets tired. Ji-hyuk looks at them with interest, hoping for a positive response. He asks them if they are willing to pay 30,000 KRW per hour, as this one is equivalent to 3 human porters. The 3 of them start discussing. One of the guys says 30,000 won is just a third of the cost, to which the second guy replies that this is a reasonable offer. The girl with them looks at the guys with no interest as she listens. They finally agree to the offer. Ji-hyuk is thrilled as he tells them to make sure to spread the word about his service. One of them laughs at Ji-hyuk and tells him he is less of an awakened and more of a businessman. He smirks at the comment and thinks to himself, it's not hard to be a businessman. Earning money easily is the best. I have to agree with Ji-hyuk for stating facts. The story shifts to another panel showing Ji-hyuk sitting in a shaded area with his coffee as long lines of awakened wait to rent skeletons from him. He smiles at his success in making money without effort. A girl is managing the magic portal and handing out the skeletons to the awakened. To understand the identity of this girl, we go back in time. One day, when Ji-hyuk was roaming the gate to perfect the skeleton porter MK2's macro system, he noticed something strange on his way. His skeletons looked over to find someone lying on the ground lifelessly. Ji-hyuk wondered if that person was already dead. He told his skeletons that getting involved would just be another mess to clean up, so they should just pretend they didn't see anything. However, the skeletons seemed to pity the body so much that none of them followed him. Ji-hyuk realized that his skeletons were behaving just like him, showing sympathy toward the lifeless body. That left him with no choice. He opened his magic realm as he came to the conclusion that he did need another part-timer who could stand at the stall while he was selling. He wondered what had happened to this girl. Diving into her past, he saw memories of her family, who depended on her. Her brother had told her not to rush herself, and if things got worse, he could start a part-time job too. She had replied that he was a student and she was an awakened, so she could get a job easily. Upon seeing her past, Ji-hyuk decided that he would make sure to get the part-timer's wages to the family, as it was better than her dying and leaving her family to suffer. He returned to her memories once more to learn how she ended up like this. He saw that she had suffered a severe injury and had asked one of the awakened with her for help, but he refused and blamed her, saying it was the result of her reckless actions. When another awakened asked what they should do about her, he responded that they should leave her there and move on. After seeing all of her memories, Ji-hyuk stood up and said, "How disappointing to get betrayed by such a bunch of trash like them." The girl gained consciousness and heard Ji-hyuk as he said that she should join him from now on to work together. The girl, now revealed to be Han Seo-ha, looked at Ji-hyuk with a confused expression, trying to make sure she heard him right as she pointed a finger at herself. Ji-hyuk nonchalantly told her he was talking about her. Back to the present, everything seemed to be going great, and Seo-ha's fast work was earning him a good amount of money. The only issue standing in his way was how to deal with the people who had left her to die in the cave. Ji-hyuk, lost in his thoughts, wondered if intervening would be too troublesome, so he chose to ignore it. Later, he noticed that not all of his skeletons had entered the cave. This led him to the conclusion that the cave had a limit on the number of entrances. He wondered if it might be better to leave and start somewhere else. He decided to observe more and decide later. Placing his coffee on the stand, he told Seo-ha that he would be back from the bathroom. The scene jumps to three porters standing far from Ji-hyuk's stall, looking frustrated. A girl among them says that everyone is using skeletons and no one is hiring porters. The young man next to her suggests that maybe they should try a new gate. Chansu replies that they couldn't because this was the closest gate to them. An idea crossed his mind that they should request Ji-hyuk to reduce the number of supplies he was selling and perhaps lower the quantities slightly. She asked if he thought the plan would work. The other guy recommended that moving to another location would solve their problem. He continued, pointing out that even after renting all his skeletons to the awakened in the area, Ji-hyuk still had a number of skeletons. He might soon expand to nearby gates. Chansu responds, saying, "How long are we going to keep getting pushed like this?" A man approached them, named Kim Young-ji. He mocked Chansu by saying that he was making sense for once. Young-ji looked over at Ji-hyuk's stall and told them that Ji-hyuk is an F rank, and there's no way he can make money using all his summons. Chansu told him he shouldn't mess with the awakened, to which Young-ji replied that it was foolish to think he would go around messing with an awakened, no matter how weak they are. He added with a smirk that he wasn't doing all of this without some backing. He declared that the awakened supporting him had agreed to work and offered to help Chansu and his group, saying they should join him and flood the area. Upon hearing Young-ji, Chansu's friends told him that this wasn't a bad idea. If they wanted to compete with Ji-hyuk, they would have to work for 10,000 won per hour, which seemed like a waste. Chansu responded by saying she wasn't wrong, but that resolving the issue through a discussion with Ji-hyuk might also work. His friends disagreed, telling him there was no guarantee it would work and that they were going to join Young-ji. Young-ji, hearing this, told Chansu that if he changed his mind, he could join them since Chansu's strength was something that would help. Chansu sighed and muttered that this didn't feel right to him. He thought about secretly passing Ji-hyuk a note to warn him about them. He snapped out of his thoughts as Ji-hyuk made a sudden appearance. Not only that, but he asked Chansu if he was trying to warn him. Startled by his sudden entry, Chansu looked at him as sweat dripped down his chin. Ji-hyuk thought to himself, I might like this guy. Surprised by Ji-hyuk, Chansu asked Ji-hyuk if he heard everything. Ji-hyuk, without thinking twice, tells him he did hear him. He continues with a faint smirk that he really hates when people try to trap him. Chansu looks at him with widened eyes as Ji-hyuk asks him if he would like to work part-time for him. Hesitant, Chansu asks him what kind of part-time work. Ji-hyuk tells him he has been meaning to expand his business and will pay him generously. Chansu agrees with him and tells him if he does it this way, he thinks all the other porters will come back. Ji-hyuk tells him this is the best plan he had in his mind. He adds that the other porters Chansu was talking about are not guys who just left, saying they would crush him. Chansu gets nervous as sweat drips down from his face. He realizes Ji-hyuk is entirely correct. Chansu tries to defend his friends, saying their actions were not entirely bad, and he will definitely convince them with the terms Ji-hyuk offered. With confidence, he tells him he will persuade them. Ji-hyuk sighs and says he doesn't usually forgive people who betray him, but he knows what it's like to have no money, as all his life he strived to earn and went through a lot of troubles just to get to square one. He tells Chansu he will give him another chance, but he should keep the terms a secret and try to persuade them without it. If they trust Chansu, they will come and should show some loyalty. He asks what Chansu thinks, whether he can do it or not. The scene cuts to young Ji, who appears with his people, telling his leader Jang Hyuk that he had come back with a team to work with. One of Chansu's friends looked nervous as he felt unease growing in his mind. Jang waves a hand and welcomes everyone. He begins by addressing the group, saying they all gathered here to take down Ji-hyuk. He continues that he had tried Ji-hyuk's skeletons and they were very convenient and cheap. It makes us wonder why people should hire real porters. With a swift motion, he places his arm on young Ji's shoulder and adds that his situation is a bit different. He points out young Ji and tells everyone that young Ji earns him a lot of money, so he has to stand up for porter rights. Young Ji smiles faintly as sweat drips down his forehead. Jang looks at everyone with an evil smile as he explains that Ji-hyuk will be heading home. He is always on time when it comes to quitting. He insists everyone go and meet him and start complaining loudly and blatantly. When he reacts and tries to get physical, Jang will step in with his team and take care of him. Chansu's friends look at each other as the people in front of them declare that this way, Jang will look like an aggressor, which will keep them on the safe side, causing no issues on their end. Upon hearing them, Jang adds he will charge 15 to 20% of whoever steps in. Young Ji looks at him, surprised, and says that this wasn't included in the plan. Jang gets pissed and tells him punishing an awakened wasn't free. Before young Ji can respond, Jang interrupts him and says it's his choice if he wants Ji-hyuk to steal his work or would rather pay 25% and get more jobs. Defeated, young Ji has no choice, so he tells him he will do it. Jang pats his shoulder and says young Ji is easy to work with as he understands the reasoning behind Jang's doings. Leaving the scene, young Ji is now alone. Members from the team walk towards him and ask if it's true that they will have to pay 25%. The other guy adds if it is true, how will they survive? Young Ji, frustratedly, yells that they should keep their mouth shut. It's all because of Ji-hyuk. If he weren't here, they wouldn't be losing income. Young Ji yells and tells everyone to leave if they don't agree with the terms. Everyone gets alert as Chansu enters the scene. Panting, he points out that everyone should calm down. He adds that this isn't the solution. Before he can explain himself, young Ji angrily says to him why he is here or if he was pretending to care for them. Chansu interrupts young Ji as he explains that he saw and had met Ji-hyuk personally. Upon hearing Chansu, young Ji pulls out his fist and tells him he was just a traitor trying to lure them. Chansu shakes his head, explaining that this was not the case. He only asked Ji-hyuk if he could open up a way for them to make a living, and Ji-hyuk told Chansu that he would make a solution, but there must be a way for them to work together. Even with summons, it's too much for one person to handle. Young Ji asks Chansu what the solution to this is. Chansu hesitates before answering as he doesn't know himself. Young Ji smirks at his response and tells him it's a ridiculous idea. How are they supposed to stop him on just vague promises? Chansu replies that he can't share too many details now but insists that Ji-hyuk isn't a bad person at all. The problem with him can be resolved through discussion. He then asks them to trust only him. The porters begin considering Chansu's words. One of them declares that Chansu is worthy of their trust because he helped one of them and lent him money. Young Ji yells at them, insisting that they need to protect their work themselves. In the end, Chansu's friends decide to trust him and apologize for leaving him. Chansu feels overjoyed and tells them they have made the right decision. Young Ji calls out to the porters before they leave, warning them that if they leave now, he succeeds in dealing with Ji-hyuk to restore things to normal, and they will no longer have to work here. Ji-hyuk, with Seo, walks down the street as they order dinner for themselves. Upon hearing Ji-hyuk ordering, Seo's mouth starts watering. Someone calls out to them. The person turns out to be young Ji, who was planning a protest against him. Young Ji looks at him shockingly as he wonders if Chansu told him everything. Ji-hyuk laughs and asks why he thinks Chansu is the one who told him about the plan. He clarifies that all Chansu did was make a simple request to work part-time with him, and Ji-hyuk agreed. Jang, stunned by this statement, listens as Ji-hyuk responds that it doesn't really matter. Then he summons a magic circle and tells him that he initially intended to provoke him for fun. Using his magic, Ji-hyuk summons magical chains to bind Jang. He notices others hiding nearby and calls them to come out. Ji-hyuk uses the chains to drag them all out. He then turns his attention back to Jang and remarks that by this time, he should realize something was off. Ji-hyuk stares at Jong with interest, then declares now that he has gotten a closer look at him. Ji-hyuk recognizes him. He says that Jong is the enemy of Seo. He states that he felt unease letting him go so easily, but Ji-hyuk was too lazy to find him. Ji-hyuk activates his magic as he stares at Jong with fury in his eyes. With a smirk, his eyes glowing a deep red, he states, "This is what happens when you harass people who are just trying to do their jobs." He compares Jong to a thug. Confused and overwhelmed, Jong asks Ji-hyuk who he is. Ji-hyuk slams him to the ground, shouting, "This is what happens to people like you." Ji-hyuk continues with anger, his gaze fixated on Jong as he tells him he crossed the line this time. He then summons his army of skeletons. Ji-hyuk tells him to prepare himself for what's coming next as the skeletons grip Jong's body. Ji-hyuk thinks to himself that he must overreact this time to make Jong an example for anyone who tries to harm him. The beating continues, with the large number of skeletons turning Jong into a piece of flesh. As the fighting ends, Chansu and his other members bow to Ji-hyuk, showing their gratitude toward him. Ji-hyuk tells them not to make a big deal out of it, as he needed more people anyway. Chansu hesitantly asks Ji-hyuk what he did to those guys. Ji-hyuk smirks at the question and tells him he just gave them a valuable lesson and a friendly warning not to act like that anymore. He then tells them to leave the past behind and focus on the main topic instead. He explains that the hourly rate he is offering is lower, at 25,000 won. Before they can respond, he adds that they will never run out of work again. One of them questions why that is. Ji-hyuk summons a massive skeleton with 6 legs from his portal. He explains that if they work with this skeleton, then they are all set. The 3 of them stare at the skeleton with blank expressions, trying to make sense of it. The scene shifts to a group of awakened individuals. One of them tells his member that he heard about skeletons transporting goods in a nearby city and how efficient they are. Another responds that people are visiting that city often to benefit from these skeletons. One of them expresses his eagerness to see these skeletons. He wonders aloud if he should travel to the other city to try them. While talking, he hears a girl calling out to him. She is seated on a chair supported by skeletons. She informs them that her team consists of herself and 2 skeletons and offers their services at a rate of 120,000 won per hour. The awakened individuals are surprised at the sight and ask her if they can rent the skeletons. She tells them this is not possible, as the skeletons can only be rented as part of a team. The 3 guys discuss among themselves. One questions whether they should pay for the additional person. Another replies that the price isn't too high, and they won't lose much by trying. The girl tells them to get ready. She adds that they can start immediately, as they can handle packing while moving. Upon hearing her, one guy makes sure he heard her right. A new monster appears, and the girl alerts them as she uses the skeleton to shield herself. The awakened individuals comment on how ingenious the idea is, as it eliminates the need to worry about the porter. After the fight, the girl emerges from the skeleton and tells them she will quickly gather the remaining process. One of the guys asks her what happened to the item, to which she replies that she handled everything. The guy expresses his admiration, saying she is amazing, and tells her to work with him. She happily agrees, assuring him that it's no problem. We see Ji-hyuk looking at the mass of skeletons. He stares at them, wondering why something feels unsatisfying to him. He thinks to himself that remembering how undead were looked down upon in Saren makes him angry. He has been hesitant about increasing the number of porters until now. Since it's not for combat, people are surprisingly okay with it. He folds his arms and sighs as he says he would love to mass-produce these and rake in the money, but that would inevitably draw attention. If that happens, his peaceful retirement plan would be shattered. He scratches his head as he mutters that doing so would only bring unwanted attention to him. Finally, Seo looks at him and says it was getting annoying for her to listen to Ji-hyuk talk about this stuff. Annoyed by Seo's statement, he wonders if that's how parents feel when their kids are glued to their smartphones. He bonks her on the head and asks what she's watching. She shows a video of idols dancing. Ji-hyuk says those idols must make a ton of money from a single performance, but fame comes with no privacy and lots of struggles. He adds that he just wants to earn money quietly. Realization hits him as he wonders if being rich is enough to draw attention. If he's going to get attention anyway, why not go all out? He dials a number and makes a call. Someone picks up as Ji-hyuk begins with his introduction. He orders the person to increase the amount of monster bones he buys. The person asks how much they should increase it. Ji-hyuk looks over his balance, and with confidence, he tells them to increase it directly to 32 million. The person on the other line is startled by his statement. Ji-hyuk adds that from now on, he will invest every single profit into buying more bones. Then he ends the call, saying to handle it well. He tells Seo that he had entrusted bone purchases to Mr. Park. Seo, upon hearing this, responds with a simple thumbs up. Ji-hyuk looks over his phone, trying to find what else he needs. He realizes he requires a company. He should start by renting a decent warehouse, setting up a company, and distributing dozens of these daily. Likewise, he stops and thinks to himself that instead of taking it slow, he should just push everything out all at once.
At the Gate Management Bureau Awakener Registration Office, the office director, Young Sung-hoon, seated in his chair with a curious look, asked his assistant, "Is there anything special to report?" His assistant looked at him with surprise and said there was nothing special, but he suddenly remembered Ji-hyuk. He asked Young if he knew about that special management target. Upon hearing his name, Young laughed faintly and said, "The guy with the transport skeletons?" His assistant started explaining Ji-hyuk's latest record, stating that he made 32 skeletons a month ago. Young's curiosity piqued, so he asked his assistant, "Why did you ask?" His assistant responded that Ji-hyuk started a company called Saren, which officially opened today. Young replied, "See? It all depends on how you use your ability. Who would have thought he would make such good use of those weak skeletons? If he started a company, he must have made some decent money, right?" His assistant let out a soft sigh and replied, "Based on rough calculations, his monthly earnings are probably in the billions of won." The statement shocked Young. His voice rose as he said, "What? So should we remove him from the special management list since his summons seem to have hit their limit?" Before they could continue, one of the members barged into the office, panting. He asked if they had heard the news. Young asked, "You mean about Ji-hyuk? I already heard about him starting a company." But the guy rejected that notion and remarked, "It's about his transport skeletons. Ji-hyuk just invited a massive number of porters and is flooding them with skeletons." Ignoring his statement, Young and his assistant started talking about Ji-hyuk's record. Young asked, "What's the limit? Is this a new record?" His assistant replied, "Actually, he broke the old record a month ago. The previous record was 27. Impressed by his assistant's reply, Young smiled faintly and said, "Looks like we need to keep him under special management for now." But the guy lashed out, shouting, "It's way beyond that." Both of their eyes widened as Young asked, "How many skeletons has he deployed to get that kind of reaction?" The guy raised his hand, pointing 3 fingers. Upon seeing that, Young asked, "Is it 30 or 62? Maintaining that many summons is—" But his words were left hanging in the air as the guy shouted, "It's 300! And there are likely more on the way!" The scene shifted. Young walked outside his office and noticed many horse skeletons as security handled them. The guy said, "I just checked, and the number of skeletons exceeded 350. Young asked about Ji-hyuk. The guy replied, "He's at the warehouse." He took them to the warehouse. As soon as Young entered, his eyes widened. His expression changed, and he thought, "There are more of them." Ji-hyuk told Chansu, "Since we have visitors, let's take a quick break. It's lunchtime anyway. Manager Kam, since it's everyone's first day, buy them something good to eat." Ji-hyuk offered his credit card. Chansu felt excited and said, "Got it. Thank you, boss." Ji-hyuk turned around, facing the people, and introduced himself. Young's assistant asked, "Hello, do you remember me? I'm the researcher who handled your initial test." Ji-hyuk smiled and said, "It's been a while." The assistant's eyes gazed over Seo, and he asked Ji-hyuk about her. Ji-hyuk remarked, "She is my cousin. She's here to help me with work." The assistant greeted Seo, and she nodded in response. The assistant looked over the skeleton horses and asked, "By the way, are all of these summons?" Ji-hyuk replied, "Yes." The assistant responded, "According to our staff, there are already over 350. Ji-hyuk remarked, "That sounds right." The assistant narrowed his eyes and asked, "Did you deceive us during the test?" Ji-hyuk laughed and stated, "Why would I do that? I didn't know I could summon this many either." Young approached them and said, "It's time for Ji-hyuk to stop summoning. Summoning over 100 is already overwhelming, but 350 is far beyond the typical limits of a summoning awakener. An F-rank awakener shouldn't be capable of this." Ji-hyuk denied it. "Why would I stop summoning?" Young said, "This situation is entirely abnormal." Ji-hyuk folded his arms across his chest and replied, "I don't see anything wrong with it. When I founded this company, I had lawyers review all the summoning-related laws. There are no regulations on the number of summons. Young nervously whispered to his assistant. Are you sure this isn't a problem? The assistant replied. Legally, there's nothing wrong. The law wasn't designed for this scale in the first place. Ji-hyuk stepped forward and said, I founded this company under the special law for awakeners, which allows the rental and usage of abilities for profit. Its safety has been proven by its consistent use without issues. He added, Is there anything else to address? In the end, the registration office staff, who witnessed the massive number of summons, couldn't argue against Ji-hyuk's thorough preparations and left without a word. The scene transitioned. Ji-hyuk gritted his teeth and remarked, Sometimes a big impact all at once is the best strategy. If I had released a few dozen a day, they would have come up with all sorts of excuses to interfere. Ji-hyuk added, People freeze when something completely outside their expectations happens. Anyway, should I keep going? I could easily produce 300 a day. If I save up 2,000 summons and release them all at once, no one will be able to say a word. Ji-hyuk and Seo lifted their hands in the air, and he shouted, Let's really go for it this time. The scene shifted to Ji-hyuk sitting in his office, his expression completely off. He said to Seo, I don't want to work. 4 days, that's how long it took me to make 1,000 transport skeletons. Meanwhile, the media was in an uproar about an awakener with over 500 summons, but that was none of his business. What matters is that I really don't want to work hard, he muttered. He leaned back in his chair and said, Was I too excited about starting the company? Making 300 a day is no joke. He sulked and let out a sigh. I wanted to retire to avoid work, but now I have to work to afford a comfortable retirement. Does that even make sense? Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Chance asked, Can I come in? Ji-hyuk said, Yes. As Chance came in, his expression was absurd. He said, Something big is happening outside. But he stopped and looked over at Ji-hyuk, who was leaning back in his chair. Upon seeing this, Chance asked, Is there trouble here too? Ji-hyuk adjusted himself and replied, No, it's just that everything feels like a hassle. It's nothing major. But what's this big issue? Chance sweated nervously and explained, A large group of porters from another region are protesting outside. Ji-hyuk's eyes widened upon hearing the word protest. He sighed and said, Let's go check it out. Immediately, the news channel reported, They are saying transport skeletons are ruining the porter market. Awakeners now say human porters are too expensive and inefficient. Robots weren't enough, now summons are threatening workers' livelihoods. Do you know how hard it is for porters to survive and move to far-off gates? We condemn Saren's tyranny for taking away porters' jobs by using cheap summons. Ji-hyuk wondered what this was about as he looked at all the reporters. One of the reporters said to Ji-hyuk, The CEO of Saren must guarantee porters' labor rights. Ji-hyuk stepped forward and said, I am the CEO, and I understand your concerns. Let's not do this out here. Please come inside so we can discuss this properly.
The chapter opens with Ji-hyuk as he places his cup of coffee down. He says that from what he had heard, it seems like the protest is about jobs. Then he adds that he would first like to hear what his members have to say. One of the guys says that with so many transport skeletons being released into the market, the situation for porters isn't good. Because of skeletons, porters have been pushed to far-off gates. No one around here hires human porters anymore. He then adds that even if they manage to get work, they are inefficient compared to skeletons. Ji-hyuk, lost in his thoughts, wonders if one skeleton can replace 6 porters, and there are about 250 skeletons in circulation. That's around 1,500 jobs gone. He continues by realizing if he releases the 1,000 skeletons he had already made, that's nearly 3,000 jobs gone. To reach his retirement fund goal, he would need to make at least 10,000 more. The members stare at Ji-hyuk as he remains silent. Ji-hyuk wonders if that happens. Before he continues, he slams his hand on the desk and says he will stop producing transport skeletons. He says he can't threaten other people's livelihoods, so he will adjust the cost of skeleton teams to ensure they don't disrupt the market. He asks the members if this will work. All of them look surprised by his statement and tell him if he would do that, it would be great. Ji-hyuk looks over at Chansu and tells him to formalize this with proper paperwork and asks him to bring some paper and a pen. Chansu hurries out to bring him the things as he thanks internally that the issue was resolved with peace. Ji-hyuk leans back in his chair as he stares at the walls, wondering how he can make more money. Seo always stares at her phone, minding her own business. He opens a journal and starts processing his thoughts. He mutters to himself that it needs to be simple to produce and not for combat. Skeletons were well received because they weren't combat-oriented. He then adds that it can't negatively affect existing jobs. With a tired look on his face, he thinks that Chansu might think he's being considerate, but the truth is he doesn't want to get criticized anymore. He snaps out of his thoughts as his gaze follows the pen he was holding. It states, "Made in China." He looks over other things and finds the same statement written over them. An idea lights up in his mind, and then the scene transitions. At the shoe factory, Kim Deok-bae sighs as he signs the paper and mutters that this business has been in his family since his father's generation, but now it's time to make a decision. Competing with China's ridiculous prices means he can't pay his workers' wages. Deok-bae, startled by his assistant, is told that there's someone by a company called Sarin in the industrial complex. Deok-bae, hesitant, says he is jealous of that guy. He got lucky awakening his ability and is making a fortune. If he had awakened, things would have been different for him too. Before he can proceed, Ji-hyuk walks in, saying he is not here to argue about this stuff. He walks in with Seo as he introduces himself, declaring that he is interested in the shoe industry. He adds that he is interested in buying the company. Upon hearing Ji-hyuk, Deok-bae looks at him with surprise and realizes this might be an opportunity for him. He stands up and says he can buy the factory as he guides them towards it. As Seo scans the factory, Deok-bae wonders that he can't miss this chance. He has to sell it for the sake of his employees. He says to Ji-hyuk that they use a machine in the back to cut out the shoe's components, then this machine stitches them together. As Ji-hyuk studies the machines, he states that these machines seem old. Hesitant, Deok-bae says that his workers are skilled enough to make up for that. It's much better than running subpar machines. Ji-hyuk, still suspicious, tells Deok-bae to continue with his guide. After the explanation, Deok-bae wipes sweat off his forehead and says that it's the basic manufacturing process. It gets complex if he goes into detail. Before he can continue, Ji-hyuk tells him thanks and proceeds to Seo as he tells her that this looks manageable. Seo agrees as Ji-hyuk continues that it's much simpler than combat macros. Ji-hyuk asks Deok-bae if most of the work is done by hand or if there are no automated machines, to which Deok-bae replies that cutting can be done by machine, but everything else still requires manual labor. He adds Ji-hyuk might need to worry about having too many workers for the production volume, but he would actually need more employees to run the factory at full capacity. He says right now he only has 20 workers, but he used to have as many as 100. Surprised, Ji-hyuk says 100 sounds promising, but how do they handle sales? Deok-bae explains that he mostly makes shoes based on customer specifications. Customers tell them the changes they want, and they adjust the base design accordingly. Ji-hyuk asks why not produce a stockpile and sell from inventory. Deok-bae responds it's possible, but unsold inventory would result in losses. Small factories like his only handle predictable demand. Ji-hyuk laughs at Deok-bae's honesty. Deok-bae hesitantly tells him it's not a secret. Ji-hyuk asks him if he could produce cheap shoes in bulk with low labor costs. Could he succeed? Deok-bae looks at him and explains that it's not as easy as it sounds. Shoes aren't something automation can solve. There's a reason big brands don't rely on cheap labor countries for all their production. Ji-hyuk clears his confusion and tells him he is not interested in automated devices, he just wants an answer to his question. Deok-bae says it could work as cheap products always sell somewhere. With that, Ji-hyuk tells him that he will now buy the factory right away. Ji-hyuk stamps the papers and holds them in his hand as he declares that this factory now belongs to him. As Deok-bae reads the paper, his eyes tear up as he realizes that he is still the boss and Ji-hyuk agreed to keep the old employees as well. Deok-bae, thrilled, says that he will do his best to secure orders by any means, but Ji-hyuk interrupts him and tells him that won't be needed as he will produce stock and sell it directly through exports. He lifts his hand, activating his magic power as he summons a numerous number of skeletons, approaching from his magic portal. Deok-bae stares at them with a blank expression as he questions himself if they are real skeletons. The chapter opens with skeletons working around the factory. From assembling shoes to securing boxes, everything is handled by the skeletons. Upon seeing this, Deok-bae thanks Ji-hyuk, who brushes it off and tells him he is the one managing all the sales. Deok-bae then admits that he was initially surprised, as he never thought he would end up using skeletons as employees. Hesitant, Deok-bae asks if this arrangement is truly okay. Ji-hyuk folds his arms across his chest and looks at him, wondering if there was an issue since he hasn't broken any laws. Before Deok-bae can respond, Ji-hyuk interrupts by showing him a new pair of shoes and handing them over. Deok-bae takes the shoes from the skeleton's hand and examines them closely. He tells Ji-hyuk that, while they are decent, they are still not as good as something made by hand. Ji-hyuk stops him, insisting he doesn't want vague answers and presses him to identify the specific problems. Deok-bae points out that the stitching in some areas has gaps and is sloppy. Immediately, Ji-hyuk orders his skeletons through his magic to fix the issue. After some time, the skeletons resolve the problem, and Ji-hyuk presents the revised shoes to Deok-bae. Carefully inspecting them again, Deok-bae acknowledges that all the issues he pointed out have been fixed. Ji-hyuk celebrates his mini-victory by high-fiving the skeletons, declaring that if they keep refining through trial and error, they'll get it right. He mentions that the skeletons don't incur labor costs, making the savings immense. Deok-bae agrees, remarking that these savings are a game-changer, enabling them to compete with Chinese-made products and even export them. He adds that if they build a strong reputation, they might even secure OEM production orders from major brands. Curious, Ji-hyuk asks about OEM production, admitting he thought major brands operated their own factories. Deok-bae explains that most brands rely on OEM production, where they handle design and outsource manufacturing to factories. This allows them to take orders without worrying about design. Ji-hyuk reflects on this idea but wonders if it will truly be manageable. In the following weeks, Saren enters a period of constant productivity. To handle increasing orders, Ji-hyuk acquires several more shoe factories, further expanding the business. As a result, Ji-hyuk's workload increases significantly. At the end of another long workday, Ji-hyuk returns home late to rest, but his peace is interrupted by a call from Deok-bae. Apologizing for the late hour, Deok-bae informs him of a new order requiring adjustments. Ji-hyuk assures him and decides to head over to resolve the issue, bringing Seo along. On the way, Ji-hyuk ponders whether he should start training an apprentice. Seo is helpful but not enough to cover the growing demands. However, training an apprentice would require time and effort. He muses to himself that he can't simply increase the number of skeletons indefinitely. Expanding too much could lead to public scrutiny and complications. His thoughts shift when he mentions macros, triggering a realization. Ji-hyuk notes that macros aren't much different from programming. This sparks an idea. The scene transitions to a man named Bae Sang-ho, seated nervously during an interview with Ji-hyuk. Ji-hyuk glances at Sang's resume, noting that aside from part-time jobs, Sang doesn't have much experience. He asks if Sang has any special abilities. Nervous, Sang hesitates but eventually mentions that he's skilled at games. Intrigued, Ji-hyuk leans forward and asks him to elaborate. Sang explains that he excels in various genres, particularly simulation and strategy games, even ranking highly in some of them. Ji-hyuk asks if he has anything to show. Sang pulls up a video he uploaded, showcasing a game about assembling parts to make golems. In the video, Sang demonstrates how he repurposed parts to build a functioning plane, utilizing a motor originally meant for golem arms. He explains the challenges of combining unrelated parts to create a working mechanism. Impressed, Ji-hyuk immediately hires Sang and asks if he can start tomorrow. Sang eagerly agrees. On his first day, Sang arrives at the factory and is introduced to the skeleton controller, a device that programs the skeleton's movements. Ji-hyuk demonstrates how it works and assigns Sang a task, to use the controller to replicate a national gymnastics routine. Sang hesitantly accepts, given a generous one-week deadline. To Ji-hyuk's surprise, Sang completes the task in just 2 days. He demonstrates a modified skeleton, explaining that it's a skeleton mage capable of using simple magic. Sang redesigned the controller, adding buttons and levers for better control, though it's still a bit clunky due to the rushed build. Ji-hyuk praises Sang's ingenuity, calling him brilliant for finishing ahead of schedule. Ji-hyuk asks Sang if the system needs further refinement and encourages him to share any feedback. Sang nods, and Ji-hyuk pats his shoulder, telling him he has high expectations. He adds that Sang is now the company's first programmer, and as they hire more people, Sang will be their senior. Sang feels a surge of gratitude and excitement, vowing to work hard and live up to Ji-hyuk's expectations. Ji-hyuk receives a call from the registration office. They tell him that some problem might have occurred at the shoe factory lately. Before they can continue, Ji-hyuk hangs up the call. Deok-bae looks at him with concern and asks who called him. Ji-hyuk tells him that the call was from the registration office director. He keeps calling for no reason, and it gets annoying for Ji-hyuk. He tells Deok-bae not to worry about it and asks how Sang has been doing lately. Deok-bae tells him that he's been doing great. At first, he was struggling and messed up a lot of shoes, but Sang seems to have gotten the hang of it now. Impressed, Ji-hyuk tells him that it's great and it's time for them to hire another programmer. Deok-bae tells him he will post the job listing for new employees. However, Diok-bae mentions that they are not behind on production, it just feels that way because the factories are expanding faster than the rumors about them are spreading. On the other side, Seo joyfully plays with a skeleton. Ji-hyuk asks Diok-bae when they can start taking OEM orders from major brands. Diok-bae says it's only been a little over a month since they acquired the first shoe factory. Ji-hyuk replies that he is just impatient and cannot wait. Diok-bae tells him he will submit a business proposal, but companies like theirs aren't easily accepted. Curiosity piques Ji-hyuk's mind as he asks why there isn't a way for anyone to produce cheaper than them. Diok-bae explains that they are big brands. It's not just about trust, and they don't have that kind of trust yet. Ji-hyuk sighs and says to Diok-bae that if their production quality is so poor that they can't satisfy major brands. He then adds confidently that they just need an opportunity to prove their reliability. It's time for them to launch a proper ad campaign. He explains that shoes made by skeletons should generate enough buzz. Before he can continue, his gaze follows toward Seo. He asks what she was doing with the skeleton. He notices that the skeleton has completely changed its appearance. Upon seeing this, Ji-hyuk gets angry and hits Seo. He orders her to fix it back to its original look. But then, after scanning closely, he tells her to leave the shape as it was as it's kind of cute. It might make people feel less uncomfortable. Later, a customer arrives at Saren. The employee guides them about the skeletons working. Surprised, they look closely at the skeletons and add that they were expecting them to be creepy, but they found them cute. One of the customers hears another worker asking if they would like to buy a pair of shoes handmade by skeletons as a souvenir. He hands them the shoe, but the customer notices that the deal is good but the design is a bit lacking. He asks if this skeleton theme is part of the concept. The worker tells him it's just for decoration and can be removed. Excited, the customer tells him that he will buy the shoes. Saren's brand awareness skyrockets at an incredible pace. Diok-bae hands Ji-hyuk a paper. He says that it's an order from Roko, the appearance of a major brand they had been waiting for. Ji-hyuk feels a sense of accomplishment and tells Diok-bae that they should start on sample production immediately. The scene shifts to Ji-hyuk, Diok-bae, and the manager from the brand company. They all sit together as the manager looks over the sample. He says that the production cost is absurdly low, but the quality isn't bad. He agrees to propose this to upper management. Upon hearing this, Ji-hyuk and Diok-bae feel relieved. Ji-hyuk asks the manager if he thinks this will work out. Hesitant, the manager declares that the production cost is appealing, but skeleton-based production hasn't been proven yet. Ji-hyuk sighs and wonders why it hasn't been proven yet. Leaving his curiosity behind, he asks the manager if he was aware of the contract terms. The manager shakes his head, and Ji-hyuk tells him that they should prepare themselves. However, the manager adds that this is more of a temporary stopgap, so the terms aren't great. Ji-hyuk gets pissed and mutters, "Do they have to lower the price further?" Diok-bae adds that the manager meant the contract duration and guaranteed order volume won't be very large. He explains to Ji-hyuk that big brands and manufacturers often enter long-term contracts because of their scale. For example, they promise a minimum number of orders each month. It's like an incentive manufacturers get to ensure consistent sales. Ji-hyuk says it's about guaranteeing minimum revenue. Diok-bae nods and says that, in return, the brand gets a stable supply of shoes during the contract period. As the manager is still with them, Diok-bae leans in closer and whispers that sometimes brands use the guaranteed volume to negotiate lower prices, but that doesn't apply here, so he doesn't have to worry about it. The manager interrupts them and remarks that they are right. They are just looking for a temporary replacement for their suspended factory. He adds that the contract duration is short and they can't guarantee a large volume. If their local factory resumes early, the surplus will burden their headquarters. Ji-hyuk asks what the maximum volume they can offer is. The manager tells him that, from what he has heard, the contract is for 3 months with a guaranteed monthly volume under 40,000 units, but this could change depending on the circumstances. Ji-hyuk asks what kind of level that is, but Diok-bae tells him it's not enough to interest large manufacturers. Ji-hyuk thinks to himself it's something small companies like theirs accept in hopes of securing future contracts. If they just rely on the price, they won't even pass the paperwork review. Ji-hyuk asks the manager if there are any factories already under contract. The manager tells him that their headquarters has been sending proposals here and there, but no contracts have been finalized yet. Ji-hyuk suggests that they should make it a 1-month contract with automatic monthly extensions if both parties agree. Also, they won't ask for guaranteed order volumes or a deposit. He adds that the unit price will stay the same. Upon hearing this, both Diok-bae and the manager wonder if he's being serious. Ji-hyuk says if there are quality issues or defective products, they will compensate double the production cost as a penalty. They come to an agreement, and Diakbae grabs Ji-hyuk and yells, "Why would you make the terms even worse? With these terms, they could just sign the contract and never place an order." Ji-hyuk falls back and says that's what he was going for. He explains that samples are always free because people can try them without any pressure. He continues that trust is built on consistent quality, and skeletons are the best at that. Sweat drips down Diakbae's face as he processes Ji-hyuk's statement. Ji-hyuk continues that what they lack now is validation, so they should give it to them for free and let them try it. Once they experience it, they won't be able to stop at just one. He adds that once this contract is over, they will be begging them to make more shoes. Andrew, the CEO of Roku, asks his assistant if this is really the maximum production capacity they can achieve. The assistant explains that they are already at full capacity. Increasing production would require hiring additional workers, which manufacturers are reluctant to do. He adds that existing manufacturers say they can barely handle up to 200,000 pairs. So, to meet the remaining 3 million pairs, they would need to find a new factory. Andrew asks about the factory in China. His assistant says they are asking for a 6-month contract and a guaranteed production of 2 million pairs per month. After discussing, the assistant asks Andrew if he has seen a video about a summoner from Korea. They are running a shoe factory using summons. The assistant suggests that Andrew should look over the video. Surprised, Andrew looks at the skeletons working effortlessly. The assistant tells him that this caught his attention, and he sent a report for the meeting. He then shows Andrew the contract, explaining a 1-month contract with automation. Andrew makes sure there is no typo in the unit report as he clears that, according to the video, there are almost no labor costs, so the price is accurate. The assistant asks if they should give it a try, even if there are defects, they will pay double the cost as compensation. Andrew agrees and tells him to place an order. Diakbae, with excitement, tells Ji-hyuk they have received their first order from Roku. Upon hearing him, Ji-hyuk asks if they have enough materials. Diakbae says that materials are easy to source and they can get them right away. He asks if they should pause the current production lines and prioritize Roku's order. Ji-hyuk tells Diakbae that they will do both. Diakbae tells him that sewing is manageable, but shaping the components requires stamping machines, and those are already running at full capacity. Ji-hyuk tells him it's no problem as he summons bones from his magic portal. Diakbae is completely clueless, asking Ji-hyuk if he needs anything else. He tells him that should be it. The next day arrives. Andrew, in the executive meeting, tells his members that they can't delay this any longer, as they need to negotiate with current factories to lower their guaranteed volumes. The assistant's eyes widen as he sees an email sent by Roku Korea. He tells Andrew that they had already completed the orders. He hands him his phone as Andrew reads that they delivered all 10,000 pairs, and the inspection results show all of them passed the quality check, no defects at all. The assistant says that if they can produce 10,000 pairs in a single day, they can handle much larger orders. They don't require guaranteed volumes, and the contract is only for 1 month. He adds lastly that there is no better option to fill the gap. Andrew agrees, and with a smirk, he tells him to order all the remaining stock for next week. This time, they will include models for better evaluation. The scene shifts to Diakbae telling Ji-hyuk about the 60,000 pairs order. Ji-hyuk wonders if it's too much. Diakbae tells him maybe they are testing their limits as they have also inquired about the factory's maximum production capacity. Ji-hyuk smirks at this statement and says that they are definitely getting their attention. He calls Mr. Park and orders a ton of bones. Without further questions, Mr. Park takes the order. After placing the new order for 60,000 pairs, it only took Saran Company 2 days to complete. From then on, everything moved like clockwork. Within a week, an additional order for 80,000 pairs came in. After completing that in just 2 days, a follow-up order for 1,500,000 arrived the following week, and we delivered it all in just 4 days. It only took 10 days for Saran to produce a month's worth of Roku stock. Thanks to Saran's efforts, Roku managed to fill the gap left by their suspended factory. They perfectly bridged the gap caused by the temporary closure. The assistant tells Andrew that the suspended factory is now expected to resume production earlier than anticipated. Andrew says, having Saran handle production significantly boosted our profits for a while. The member says that their quality consistency was unmatched by any other manufacturer. Their ability to adjust production with skeletons is practically unreal. The assistant calls over Andrew and says that the losses they incur every year from contracts with other factories total millions of dollars. He adds that working with Saran changes the equation. Once they place an order, finished products are delivered in just a few days. Andrew remarks that they should sign a formal contract with Saran. The manager offers a file and says that this is the official contract sent from headquarters. He states that the contract is a one-year agreement with a guaranteed monthly volume of 150,000 pairs. These terms are good enough to make major manufacturers jealous. Ji-hyuk reads the file, but something feels off. He asks Deokbae if these are the good conditions. Ji-hyuk offers Deokbae to read the file. Deokbae doesn't see any issues and states that the models and production quantities per model are missing, but that aligns with their policies, so it's not a problem. The rest is just a standard OEM contract. Ji-hyuk, annoyed by his statement, says, "At this clause, loss or damage due to circumstances beyond Party A's control shall be compensated by Party B, and if Party B delays supply, they must compensate for damages." He says the factory that caused the issue this time shut down due to a coup. He asks if they really need to compensate. The manager speaks, saying the contract requires compensation, but he heard headquarters offered some leniency. Ji-hyuk gets angry and asks that they still make the compensation even though it wasn't their fault. The manager tells him that this is standard industry practice. As long as the products are defect-free and production runs smoothly, this won't be an issue. He adds that he knows Ji-hyuk is hesitant because this is their first contract, but this is practically a standardized contract in their industry. The manager explains rejecting it would mean no deals with any major brands. Deokbae says to Ji-hyuk not to worry, as these clauses are just there as precautions. Ji-hyuk speaks about his old trip to the underworld, where he was told that he only needed to do one thing and didn't have to worry about others. But when he actually got to work, it wasn't like that. The one thing they asked for ended up being ridiculously complicated. At one company, he accidentally crossed a line with the son of an executive. They went ballistic, saying they would take disciplinary action, and even though he was the reason the company was running, it felt absurd. That's when he realized that if he did everything they asked, he would end up as a pushover. After Ji-hyuk stops talking about his past, he asks Deokbae if the results have proven themselves by now. In just 2 months, they delivered hundreds of thousands of flawless pairs. Deokbae nods his head. Ji-hyuk crosses out the clause about Party B compensating and says, why should they care if they take orders from other companies? Remove that clause too. Upon seeing the crossed line, the manager tells him that this is not something headquarters will accept. Ji-hyuk narrows his eyes and asks why, as he will be offering identical terms to all brands and will prioritize others based on the order of contracts signed. Ji-hyuk relaxes and declares that he finds excessive clauses cumbersome, and if they place an order, he will do his best to deliver. The decision is up to them. As Andrew reads over the file angrily, the other members say that they are mocking them. One member says, "It's still not an amount we can ignore, the benefits of working with Saren are limitless." He adds, letting pride get in the way of financial stability is inefficient. Andrew, annoyed by the situation, says to leave for now. However, it didn't take long for that decision to waver. The assistant tells Andrew that the factory is requesting to increase production of the new DP-10 model. Andrew, annoyed, says, their demands are ridiculous, given how expensive the unit price is. If it were Saren, production would have already started. He slams his hand on the desk and thinks that he understands Saren is unusual and the rest of the industry is normal, but after experiencing Saren, everything else pales in comparison. Andrew snaps out of his thoughts as one of the members tells him that there's been a defect in the products from the Yonka factory, and they are requesting a full reproduction. He adds that the quality isn't large, but the delivery deadline will be delayed. According to the contract, the factory will cover the reproduction costs, but they will face a shortage of stock in the meantime. Andrew asks, what is Saren up to which the assistant tells him that they have been sending proposals to other brands, and some brands have been requesting samples after showing interest. An idea crosses Andrew's mind. He thinks about offering priority to the first brands that sign contracts. He asks the member to proceed with the Saren contract. The member hesitates, but Andrew yells to start immediately. To summarize, it was a success. Roko ultimately signed a contract with triple the profit margins. Deokbae tells Ji-hyuk that this month, orders from major brands had exceeded 1 million. Ji-hyuk leans back in his chair and asks, how long has it been since Roko came back? He wonders that now they are gaining traction and securing contracts left and right. Just increase the skeletons, and this is a money-making factory. Deokbae holds the paper and reads that other companies have asked if they produce clothes. Ji-hyuk says he knows about it, but could this also be about cheap labor? Without thinking twice, he says, we should work on creating a clothing factory as well. He asks Deokbae if they should go all in and become a full-scale manufacturing company. Deokbae agrees and says, this sounds great. If we can make shoes, other things should be easy. Ji-hyuk mocks China for being the world's factory and says, that's old news now. About 6 months later, Saren expanded into labor-intensive light industries, clothes, hats, and even accessories. Saren established itself as a comprehensive manufacturing company. However, a problem arose. Diakbay declares that the shoe factory is fine since orders keep coming in, but other factories often have idle skeletons. He suggests, what if we hybridize all the factories to maximize the utility of the skeletons? Once one production phase is complete, we can assign idle skeletons to other tasks. He remarks that the issue is they don't have enough space right now. All the factories they acquired are small, and once the necessary machinery is set up, there will be barely room to work. Ji-hyuk, tiredly, says that this is a major issue here. Diakbay agrees and says if they gather enough funds, acquiring a large factory would be ideal. Diakbay notices that Ji-hyuk looks zoned out as Ji-hyuk wonders that the bigger issue is he had completely lost motivation. He had made enough money, and it's all starting to feel like a hassle. Diakbay says if he is feeling unwell, he should go home and rest. Ji-hyuk agrees happily. As Diakbay continues, there's a mountain of reports waiting for you, so you must rest. He assures Ji-hyuk that the remaining difficulties aren't important, so he can go for now. But before Ji-hyuk can walk out, his phone rings, and he sees a message stating that an unstable gate has appeared near District O, and they've ordered to evacuate the area. Ji-hyuk notices that this area is nearby and orders everyone to leave. Ji-hyuk asks, what kind of monsters warrant an evacuation order? Sang says, before I came out, I checked, and they said it's skeletons. Ji-hyuk sweats nervously as he realizes the word skeleton. The emergency response team is currently confronting what appears to be skeleton monsters, but it's estimated they will take more time to suppress them. One of the team members shouts at the team leader, saying, these skeletons were taught to fight. The team leader holds onto his shield as he blocks the skeleton. He says, hold the line as long as I can. We can't let them break through. Ji-hyuk enters the scene and realizes that these skeletons were his. He summons his magic circles and tries to retrieve them quickly before the exploration mode ends, but he stops as the magic seems to not work. A loud explosion occurs, and numerous skeletons emerge from it. The soldiers try to fight them, but they notice that they are much stronger than before. Ji-hyuk thinks that they are running on the macros he programmed, so why can't he control them? He tries another method but fails. The skeleton with armor rushes toward the soldier with lightning speed and slices through his chest. Blood spills down the team leader's body as his members get concerned. He says sorry to everyone and that if only he had not let his guard down, but before he can finish his sentence, a large number of bones appear, creating a safe border for the soldiers. They look over to find Ji-hyuk flying in the sky with his magic circles. They shout at him to help them. Ji-hyuk smirks and says, that's why I am here. One of the members notices that Ji-hyuk looks familiar as he realizes he is the CEO of Saren. Ji-hyuk uses magic and destroys the skeleton army. The soldier says, he might be a multi-ability user. The team leader wonders, Ji-hyuk had abilities like this? Ji-hyuk stares at the debris of rocks around him as one of the soldiers approaches him and thanks him for saving them. Ji-hyuk tells them that he just did what needed to be done as he wonders what was wrong with his skeletons. The team leader says he never thought he would possess such abilities as he bows and shows his gratitude towards him. The soldiers ask what he thinks about the skeletons as they were very different from the past, and Ji-hyuk gets hesitant and says they should get healed first. He says that there are many wounded soldiers here, so they should treat them first. He sighs as he watches them leave. He mutters that still, for a centurion to overpower a D-rank awakener, they are weaker than he expected. He picks up a bone and hopes for a clue. At home, he lays the skeleton bones and starts experimenting as he summons his magic circle. He says that the macros he programmed seem to be intact, but it doesn't feel like his mana. No wonder the subspace didn't work. He leans back and says that his subspace only accepts inanimate objects infused with his mana. The magic globe in Seo's hands falls as Ji-hyuk gets annoyed by the voice it kept making with them. He looks over it and speaks, how did they take this? As he studies it, he notices that this mana feels similar to this core. It's raw, untamed, and rough like pure natural mana. He wonders what if it is the skeletons that were being controlled by the gate's mana. So when he crossed over to Earth, his body came through fine, but the items in his subspace were absorbed into the gate instead of his subspace. Since his mana was absent, the gate's mana replaced it, which is why they followed their macros without responding to him. He realizes if skeletons came out, that means other things might come out too. He wonders if something like a Death Knight or a Meat Golem shows up, he would be screwed. He says that he needs to create an undead army to fight for him. He remarks that he needs to rebuild the undead legion, but the biggest issue with building a legion is the magic stones. He thinks he can substitute this, so he will need to give it a try. He touches the globe and says he will also need a large number of corpses for high-grade undead. He will need to engrave magic circles with gold. He wonders when he will be able to retire as all his money is being used. Ji-hyuk declares that the way to earn more faster is simple. Just increase production and the revenue will keep growing. But doing it this way is too inefficient. As Deok-bae suggested, he needs to acquire a larger factory and implement a hybrid structure, but buying a factory will require more money. In the end, it all comes back to money. Sweat drips down his face as he wonders maybe he could go to a gate and hunt for extra income, but after rolling around for decades, now he must go hunting. He says that he has no choice given the circumstances. The team leader calls Ji-hyuk, startled by his call. He asks if he's doing all right. The team leader tells him that he wants to express his gratitude on behalf of his team. He asks if he can visit him now, to which Ji-hyuk tells him he can meet him. The scene transitions as the team leader arrives in a car, and Ji-hyuk notices some noise coming as the team leader gets out of his car. We learn his name is Park Woo-jin. He approaches Ji-hyuk with a bag in his hand. Ji-hyuk compliments his car and asks him if it was expensive. Woo-jin replies with a yes and says he went overboard when he bought it. He adds that as an awakener, he couldn't just drive any car. Ji-hyuk asks if awakeners tend to buy cars. Woo-jin explains that they do. In fact, a fancy foreign car is usually the first thing awakeners buy once they start earning money. Ji-hyuk continues by asking questions if he could ask him for a favor. Woo-jin says he can, as he was his lifesaver. Ji-hyuk points out his fingers and tells him he just came up with a brilliant idea and would love to hear Park Woo-jin's opinion on it. In the Dong Demon Dungeon byproduct market, Ji-hyuk and Woo-jin look around the market. Woo-jin nervously asks Ji-hyuk why they were at the market. Ji-hyuk says there's a reason as he asks the shopkeeper if he has any larger-looking skeletons than the one he was selling. The shopkeeper asks him how large he's looking for. Ji-hyuk explains that it should be the size of a horse. He asks if they had any high-grade monsters like that. The shopkeeper offers him a Demora. Ji-hyuk, not knowing about it, asks what he meant. Woo-jin explains it's a large feline-type monster. It's a B-rank monster, so it should be quite durable. Ji-hyuk says, do you have anything else? The shopkeeper says there are something smaller and weaker than a Demora but it resembles a horse. Ji-hyuk says he will take them too. Woo-jin says he thought this was only for strong summons, but it looks like other things fit too. Ji-hyuk nervously tells him that after some experiments, it turns out other things can fit too. He says he is not sure if it's just bones or something else. Ji-hyuk turns his back to the shopkeeper and asks how much it will be for all this. In the meantime, Woo-jin wonders, didn't he collect all the fragments back then too, but he shakes off the thoughts. Back at the office, Ji-hyuk introduces Woo-jin and tells everyone that he will be working with them. Woo-jin nods his head and says just let him know what he needs to do. Ji-hyuk summons a horse skeleton from his magic portal and tells Woo-jin to prepare himself. Woo-jin shouts that he will do his best as he takes off his jacket. He thinks to himself that it's a B-rank Demora monster, so there's no way he could handle it with his abilities, but he was sure Ji-hyuk would take it easy on him. Ji-hyuk pats the horse and tells Woo-jin to come and give this a ride. Confused, Woo-jin wonders what he's talking about. Ji-hyuk thought maybe Woo-jin was confused since there was no saddle, so he quickly makes one for him and tells him to try it out now. Woo-jin braces himself and settles on the saddle, however, he feels completely uncomfortable as he wasn't expecting that. Before he could go any further, he vomits all over the ground. Ji-hyuk tells him they will try again. After a while, they get back at it. Woo-jin finally learns to handle the horse skeleton as he says, this is much better and stable than before. Ji-hyuk suggests that he should try running with it. Ji-hyuk asks how it's going, and Woo-jin states that it's good enough for regular use. Ji-hyuk laughs and says they should call this the first round of adjustments. As Woo-jin gets off the horse, he asks Ji-hyuk if this was a combat summon. He adds if people ride it, wouldn't it be a big help in battle? Ji-hyuk stops him and says that it's not for combat, and if he needed cavalry, he would just make centaurs, why bother putting people on mounts? He continues that it's purely for riding and he plans to sell it as a mount. Woo-jin, confused, asks him if he's selling this as a mount. Ignoring Woo-jin's question, he says that this horse still needs customization. He changes the appearance of the horse with his magic. Completely stunned by the new look of the skeleton, Seo and Woo-jin shout in surprise. Ji-hyuk, upon looking at their reactions, says, this is great. Ji-hyuk says to Woo-jin that it doesn't have many features, but he can ride it even in gates, so it should be competitive. Woo-jin answers that he is right as he adds he will pour all his savings into buying one. He asks if this comes in different colors and appearances. Seo, on the other hand, keeps taking pictures with the skeleton. The prototype mount was eventually loaned to team leader Park Woo-jin. The sight of Woo-jin riding the mount in the city created quite a buzz, and as expected, inquiries about Saren's mounts flooded in. Woo-jin says with excitement that this is a massive hit. These mounts are literal attention-grabbing machines. Ji-hyuk asks if he can extend his vacation a bit. If he buys a mount later, he will give him a 30% discount. Woo Jin assures him if he's being serious, and later he says that he will use all his remaining leave. Before Ji-hyuk can continue, Sang marches in but gets surprised as he sees the mount. He says that he never thought he would see an undead mount in real life. Ji-hyuk notices him and asks if he would like to help design it, as they are working on custom designs. Without further question, he agrees and says, "Let's use a silver base to match the bone color and add some metallic accents for flair." He shows the design to Ji-hyuk, and he agrees with it, but Woo Jin interrupts and declares that this is a bit too soft looking. Since it's a mount, it should look strong. Sang explains that he doesn't get it, as subtle changes often carry an aura of strength. Ji-hyuk looks at them and thinks to himself, "I like this spirit. Healthy competition leads to great results." Ji-hyuk stops them and suggests that they should go with both designs and choose only one based on who gets the higher votes. Without any questions, they both agree with Ji-hyuk's statement. Thanks for watching until the end. If you're interested in seeing more of this type of content, make sure to like and subscribe. Drop any suggestions or feedback you have in the comment section below.